My own.
Ein Dank geht natürlich auch an
a prize for anybody who can recognize the person in the background. Emma, do you want to do any introduction, or should I just fire away? Oh, we can just do a bit of guessing games before, until everybody has arrived. So, yeah. So this, I thought I would start with this, so the kind of real life output for editions, which was our presenting of the Lune letters to the convent and the abbess, whom you see here in the picture in her Sunday best, which is a 19th century invention of a Protestant Benedictine habit, introducing our receiving the edition for which we had tried to finish for the 850th anniversary of the convent, just to give you a bit of timeline. But yeah, so who's the gentleman in the background? So anybody know where Lüneburg is on the map, roughly? Germany, good guess, yeah. Half an hour south of Hamburg, 1 hour north of Hanover. So it belonged to the Duchy of Brunswick-Lüneburg, which was the reason for the letters being collected in the first place, because the nuns wanted to show to the Duke, who was a strong follower of Martin Luther in the early 1520s, that they always had been independent, both spiritually and economically, because he wanted to turn them into Protestants and also wanted to get hold of their goods. And they struggled for 30 years. So you see the collection of letters went on until 1555, copying everything they got. It's probably as thick as the Christchurch dispute or something like that, to document all of their holdings. So that's what the letters are about. We don't have all the original letters, but we have this combination of holdings from pretty much a century of documenting what the nuns were up to, bills, spiritual letters, and the correspondence is in Latin for reaching out to the clergy. So they were looking for support from the Bishop of Hildesheim. In German, when they were corresponding with their family, because the Hanseatic network to which they belonged would work in Low German, which was the lingua franca, which would have been understood across the North Sea and the Baltic Sea. So you could correspond with Novgorod, with Bergen, with Newcastle, with Lübeck in Low German. So the secular letters are predominantly German. The clerical network mainly works in Latin, but the letters that I find most fascinating are the letters that are exchanged between the convents. So this, for example, is a letter by two relatives, both called Gertrud von Elsen, slightly confusingly, which brings us to one of the problems, getting a proper person index sorted. You see that in between we have done things in italic, so precordialissima N. Ik do caritati vestre vriendelijken te wetende, dat ik, permittente divina bonitate Dei, binnen bona sospitate. Et ipsum affectere ik van u und van unser leven amitem le te wetende. So it's a constant code switching between Latin and Low German, and it's more or less the equivalent of WhatsApp messages or something that works just in a small in-group. Having lots of in-jokes, also lots of references that are really hard to track down because it's built on a shared education, a shared lobby politics, where they are referencing sometimes the Duke just as Nebuchadnezzar or whatever. So you really have to dive into the thing. And they were successful with this. So this, the gentleman behind is proof of the success, because the Duchy of Brunswick-Lüneburg then became the Kingdom of Hanover. So it's the King of Hanover in the 18th century who was who? George II, so the nuns negotiated with their duke, who then later, whose successor was the King of Hanover and Great Britain, that they were allowed to continue in their way of life. They only had to subscribe to 2 Lutheran doctrines, but not to give up their shared wealth. So they had to scratch out any mentioning of invocation of saints, and they had to take the communion under both forms. But otherwise, everything stayed the same. So you have this wonderful setup. I should have, I'm not sure whether there's a camera schwenk later. This is the chapter house where we handed over. And so you have a picture gallery from the 12th century, from the first abbess appointed 1172 to Reinhild Freifrau von der Goltz, the current abbess, who will be hung up there in a month's time when she is handing over her office. I haven't counted, but I think she's something like the 32nd abbess without any stop in it, which means that all of the archival material, including the letter books, are still in the convent itself. And one of the challenges with our edition is that we make use of this richness of resource, which is pretty unparalleled. The only parallel I can think of are actually the Oxbridge colleges, which have shape-shifted in a similar way. So from more religious institutions to more secular, but keeping a kind of core identity. And so Owen has a similar heritage to look after in Jesus College as these convents have. And you will be familiar with how to make use of all the archival material, all of also things like where do we have? We have pretty much all stained glass, for example, with the oldest depiction of Birgitta of Sweden in the anywhere in Europe. We have all of the tapestries done. So this is a wonderful database, inschriften.net, which lists all the holdings of all the convents. So this is just the convent of Lüne, which has several hundred, if not 1,000 objects still there too. So the chapter house in which we were presenting the edition was built in 1510 with concrete, where we have the bill for in the letter book. And things like that are really fascinating. Cement is concrete? Not quite. It's all brick, so the binding material between North German brick. All right, so coming to the edition proper, we do it together with a publisher, Mohr-Siebeck, in Tübingen, and have reached an open access agreement, which means we are allowed to successively put on the letters online as we finish them. In a way, you see, vorläufige Anzeige, noch nicht zitierfähig. That has been the case for 4 years, but it's now pretty much ready to go. At least the first letter volume. So, as I said, these are in this, the first letter book has 35 quires written by 22 nuns. The first one was the one written really in haste, because the Duke was literally hammering on the door of the convent demanding access. So it's a mess. This first volume is an absolute mess to edit, because each nun started scribbling in one quire, and if she ran out of space, she put an extra layer of paper around it, continued on the new last page, and then continued on the new first page, which means if we want to edit it in some form of sequence, we can't just replicate the sequence of the bound letter book, because that would divide up letters. So we have this overview of the 413 letters in the first volume, and you can sort them according to where they were sent from, the date, and who they were addressed to, and it will each letter is sorted as a unit regardless of where it starts, on which choir, and which place in the choir, and where it ends. We are still to tackle the second and third volume of these letters, but hope, really fingers crossed, that it should be much easier, because that was all written by the Cantrix, who was a professional. So it's one hand, so we'll be hopefully able to use Transkribus, because it's a corpus which you can really train, other than with these 22 different hands. and most of the nuns, they had a solid education, 10 years of Latin school, but some obviously hadn't paid attention. So we have two hands, they get all the endings wrong in Latin when they are copying it down. So, and we won't have that problem with the other two-letter books. Also they are so, while here you can see quite a lot of the date when they were sent is currently undatiert, and they so not dated, and we won't have that for the other two volumes because the volume manuscript 30 is all letters that came in, and 31 all letters that went out in chronological order with the sender and addressee given. While we tried to reconstruct it for the first volume, it not always being possible because quite a lot of the things that were copied were actually just excerpts that were kept like fundraising templates. So that didn't have a name, or it was anonymized. You see here the bit I highlighted, Praecordialissima N, that had already been anonymized for just keeping it as a record, while for the other two volumes, the scriptrix herself made sure she tried to reconstruct who was actually meant by the address. While here you see in this box above the letter, you have it added in later, what could be reconstructed. So it's a GE in Meding, so Meding being one of the other convents that is the sender. So I'll hand this round because we didn't manage to get it printed by the publisher in time for handing over. I did a mock copy. And so these are just some sample pages of how the printed edition will look like, and how the introduction looks like. And then it was another decision we had to make, which elements we want to prioritize for the print edition. So for our online edition, we have two ways of looking at the letters. Currently, we are in the diplomatic version. I'm trying to make it slightly bigger so that you can see more of it, but I'm not sure how possible it will be. You see, we replicate exactly what's on the page. You see in the second line here, the reservavit has been crossed out, so we replicate that. What we have replicated hyphenation, for example, here's a de auratis, while in the Leseansicht we've turned it into a running text without the hyphenation, with normalization also for the Middle Low German. And I probably have to owe up at this point of that it took us really a long time to agree on how far to normalize. And interdisciplinary working is exciting and important, but not always without ruptures. So our team consists of Eva Schlothäuber, medieval historian in Düsseldorf, who until half a year ago was also president of the Society of German Historians, also politically very active person, and myself as co-I. And we have two postdocs, one linguist and one historian. And then and neither of us is a real specialist in medieval Latin and medieval liturgy, two really key areas to understand that. So we got on board an additional postdoc who works also in Düsseldorf, Philipp Stenzig, who is ingenious. He thinks in Latin and he can read this like German, but the downside of it is he doesn't see the point of editing mistakes. So if there was this nun who didn't pay attention to endings, he just corrects it. And so I, as a linguist, would argue we need to see the mistakes to understand how school worked in these convents. So we agreed at least to have this diplomatic version, but we couldn't get him to agree to have, for example, in the UV distribution in Latin, even in the diplomatic version. So we have it hyper-diplomatic for the German elements and semi-diplomatic for the Latin elements. So we got him to agree to keep things like crossed out German, but you see the reservavit, even that is crossed out, is normalized with a V, while in here you see it with spelled with a U, reservavit. And also there was just no way to retain the abbreviations. We had to find fairly early on a middle ground that retained enough of the elements that we really wanted to analyze. And we decided we really wanted to analyze Middle Low German in depth, but we didn't want to linguistically analyze in depth medieval Latin. It would be an interesting topic, but not interesting enough to put in the double amount of work from what we did. So it was Abwägung, Güterabwägung, weighing up of how much effort certain elements of the edition were worth. Similarly with the comments, so we have consistently referenced, it's just nothing in here, the biblical quotations. So we have a double apparatus. Oh yeah, there is one. The critical apparatus that gives explanations for all of it. Oh yeah, and as you see, there is the option to show it side by side with a facsimile, which also made it easier for us to let go of some of the hyper-diplomatic elements, because anybody who is really interested in UV distribution in Latin can just look at the facsimile, and they probably will do that anyway. And we thought it's more important to get the commentary, to invest the time in getting the commentary so that it's accessible to a further paper. So we've linked in BibliaNet, which is the standard that's used by the Herzog August Bibliothek in Wolfenbüttel. And it's quite handy because you can customize exactly which Bible versions are popping up. So the default we have set is to have Vulgate next to Luther's translation, which is nearly contemporary to the letters. So it's the L45 is Luther's translation from 1545. But you could, in the drop-down menu, also just pick what's here, King James. It show that if you were interested. And in terms of further ways of making it accessible, we have a header for each of the letters, and then we have a summary in German and a summary in English. And currently, we have two people listening in online, Miranda Lewis, who's representing early modern letters online. So these are the elements that we are proposing to feed into early modern letters online, and she's currently taking notes on that. So that will be these header data with everything that we are showing here. So from whom, from where, to whom, when, and then the English summary. And the other person on the Teams call currently, Isabel, Erasmus intern with me for this term, is going to expand these summaries with material from the footnotes, which we haven't translated into English. We hope that this will provide enough tags. We've tried to include in the summary all keywords we thought might be of interest. Devotion, image, if there's an image that is being sent, it's always mentioned in the summary, so that hopefully that will allow searching for these here. These are the Pulcherrimis foliis de auratis, which were sent from convent to convent. The basic information on the manuscript is simply which choir. As I said, it's important to understand the structure of the underlying volume and the folio and which languages are used in the letter, whether it's this one is a German only. And I've picked this because it shows you quite what task it was to edit it. So here, just trying to get it slightly. Jesum Christum, den Kaiserli, Gro, Mächti, Herren, unde Gnedi, Ri, Furs, etc. GT Fratris Littera, alderlei en vi for, dat du in call van schick, wes de le. And this is what we have tried to reconstruct. Jesum Christum, den kaiserlichen, großen, mächtigen Herren und den gnädigen, rieken Fürsten, etc. GT Fratris Littera. Alderlei wes de en, wir haben verforen, dat du in Korte van Schickinge weder des Levendes gan wollt, weder fornieren den ehrlichen Staat des heiligen, echtes Levendes. So there are about a dozen extremely abbreviated letters, which all in Low German, which would have made absolute sense to the nuns reading it, but took quite a while for us to make sense of. So we basically had to write our own Middle Low German grammar, since all forms of to have, haben, are abbreviated. So we were very fortunate that just while we were starting the big Atlas der Mittelniederdeutschen Schreibsprachen came out, which gives for each of the Ortspunkte, each of the local places, the most used forms, for example, for Haben. But what we also realized, we always checked it against the usage in the fully written out letters, was that the nuns don't adhere to the standardized grammar. And the reason for it seems to be that the data for the official grammar and the atlas comes from dated texts, which are normally charters written by professional scribes, and professional scribes who had got their education in German, while the nuns had their education in Latin. They, of course, speak Low German, but they speak it, but they write it as if a Geordie speaker would just write down what they hear. So it's much more heavily dialect than the official written documents. And we tried to reflect that. We couldn't in all cases if we didn't have enough data from the other Low German letters. We just went for the default form in the grammar, but just 2 months ago, we decided that actually the second person plural of Haben should be Hebet and not Hebben, as we had done so far. So I had to go through all 1,200 cases of Haben to check whether Haben in this case was second person plural or not. We can't find many more of these things because it's just too. But actually, it should be possible to, since we have tagged everything, to search for second person. So below each of the letters, you have the XML data for the individual. Letter, and you see here, for example, choice abbreviation FRA expanded to FRATRE. And so in this letter, you have practically expanded abbreviation for every word. So you see how long this goes on. You have in between one word or two words that are full, but the rest is all expanded, which was extremely work intense. And also we are just going, I think, for the 4th time through the whole letters, because you really only know in hindsight all of these, how to expand all the abbreviations. As I said, it should become better in the 2nd and 3rd volume because they weren't under such a lot of pressure to do this. Slightly wrong order from how we started it as a Word document. So this is the letter of the two Gertruds von Elze. You see how we first transcribed it in Word. And if you are thinking whether to do something similar, I just say don't. It was a nightmare to convert it into XML from there. We had been assured, so we took the template of the Herzog August Bibliothek, which they had used for the letters of Andreas Karlstadt, Andreas von Bodenstein genannt Karlstadt. And there it seems to have worked, but it was much less complex. Word can cope with one level of complexity, but definitely not as we did it, where we used color, for example, to mark names. We had comments for what should later become the apparatus, and we had bold for what was to become the other language. Underlined are new loan words from Latin into German. So affectere, for example, from acceptare to affectare, to affect in English. And the letters are full of these. Allevieren, I particularly like, unde davon werd min herteken saepius recreert. Wente wann ich alle qua molestia vexert bin, ex multis occupationibus, unde den illus principis gloriosus ansehe, so lat mi dünken, wo sie mi pondus totius merodis statim allevieren. So you can really hear speak with a vexeren, a wonderfully evocative a new form, which isn't, all of those that are underlined aren't in the current really big Middle Low German dictionary, because they are all spontaneous word formations. So we wanted to mark these. But the conversion program on the script that we used just couldn't cope with these levels of complexity, to have comments plus markup bold plus colors inside, which means that we are still in parallel trying to de-junk the script that is full of unnecessary formatting instructions in XML. So for the next 2 volumes, we are going to work directly in Transkribus. What we'll do with Philipp Stenzig, our ingenious Latin and liturgy specialist who still uses WordPerfect for Windows 95, is that we'll print his text, scan it in, and just import the text into Oxygen and then mark it up there. We've really realized you can't do these conversions automatically. What's a bit of kind of caution to end it. I'll open the discussion. I might ask first Miranda whether she needs any more information or would like to hear anything. That's very disconcerting transcript of me running along. Miranda, is there anything you would like to hear more about metadata also?
I think my only I'd like to hear is whether you created a master list for your people, your authors and recipients, and the people, if you were tagging any as being mentioned within the texts.
Yeah, we did. So the Personenregister is here, and so you that gives you all the letters where they are mentioned. So if you search for the 2 Gertrud von Ilse, you see they are also hyperlinked. This Gertrud von Ilse is under Beziehungs, so relationships, is related to the other Gertrud Ilsen, and the nun in Kloster Meding is only mentioned in 2 letters, while the sub-prioress of Lüne is mentioned in many more letters. What we also put in is, so while we were doing the letter editions, the 2 postdocs have been editing related but simpler documents from Lüne. One is the Convent Chronicle, here abbreviated as KC. So that gave us the dates when she died and when she also entered the convent, Klostereintritt. Wolfenbüttel Herzog-August-Bibliothek is one of the institutions in Germany with the power to create GND data. So they have so far created it for all the higher ranking papers. So for the prioresses, abbesses, and scriptrix, we have already these norm data. We haven't, but the special thing about this volume is that so many of the lower ranking nuns who normally wouldn't be showing up in archival documents are also involved in writing. So the goal is to add for all of them also the data and make it possible to jump between the letters and automatically extract all the data from there. And they are all, let me see where, here it should be showing up in the, yeah, here you see type person, it's all tagged within the edition.
Gosh, yes, thank you. That's wonderful to see. I love the fact also that you're able, one would be able to put in add into the metadata about the individuals, the date, for example, that they enter the convent. I mean, that's something I've been doing within EMLO for large groups of people, whether it's membership to something like the Royal Society or membership of a particular society. It's a superb thing to be able to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions to the floor? I'll repeat it for you, Miranda. So,
previously, I don't think it's quite time to kind of sit around in a circle and have a bit more of a discussion, keep the informality, and make it feel a bit more like a community. So I don't know if I want to do that or if I would just give questions.
Why don't we just go around the room? Because I would also, since we are still in the middle of the process, I would be curious to hear from you what you would like to see further from the edition. I can't promise that we can fulfill all wishes, but since we are just setting up for the 2nd and 3rd volume, so if we could go just around the room and I could get a wish list or things that you find strange or puzzling. So, Irina.
Well, yeah, I'm not specialized in German, but I think I'd love to see more about the Latin.
Yeah.
Only because I'm more of the Latin.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it would be interesting to have the Latin. There may be another stage.
Yeah. So Irina just asked for more information on the Latin. What is online is the full introduction, which has a section on the language use of the nuns. So, for example, we know that they probably pronounced C-I or T-I like the French as S. So we quite often have kiss spelled as piscis. We've discussed these clear cases. And I'm just commissioning an English translation of the introduction. But I've recently, Andrew knows that, been quite impressed by how good Google Translate is. So if you throw in the chapter on Latin into Google Translate, it should be possible to get.
It's also brilliant that you added the amount of data you would about those words that were in the underlines.
Yeah. 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 And actually, we want to have another bullet point here for our glossary, which is there in raw form, but it was just too messy to put it online currently. But it's in the pipeline. Yeah, Katharina.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. That's really interesting. I'm just browsing through the edition.
Yeah.
You were talking. So what I was thinking to ask you about would be whether you plan to link from authority files to the mentions of people in the letters and the other way around, so it makes it interactive, and perhaps the same with places, whether that would be useful for your research.
So the question was how we'll link up what we now have as separate index of person and also as we really wanted to do more with a mapping program. So this is the Klosterkarte, the map of convents in Lower Saxony. It should be very easy actually to extract a project-specific map from there. I had an intern last Hillary term who was working on network analysis, and she did a preliminary visualization of the network. So these are things that we definitely plan to do, and there should be the intersections there to do it, but we just severely underestimated the amount of proofreading for these letters. Yeah. Yeah.
Are there any extant letters by these nuns, these particular nuns, anywhere else in other archives?
Yeah. Extant letters by the nuns, not that many, but other institutions weren't as good as keeping a record as the convent. The largest cache is in the town archive of Lüneburg. Lüneburg, fortunately, was never bombed or raided or whatever. So the city archive is pretty good and has particularly the financial bonds for the convent. We have at the end of this letter book several letters that were just put in, probably because they were just in the process of copying it. So we have a few examples from the convent itself which overlap. You see how these letters were sent. They were written on one side and then folded, address put on, and sent off. So this is the one side. And we can identify some hands. Outside Lüneburg, we haven't been able to track down more of the original letters. Yeah. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think the whole idea of the folding with the letters in is very interesting, and I think it's it's interesting the way you've been able to use digital edition to make that a lot clearer and how you edition. You've shown that as well. Letter knocking and things like that, so you can get into the digital edition. I think elsewhere, so that's just very cool.
Yeah.
I don't think that's interesting.
Yeah.
I really like it.
No, we are thinking of perhaps there is this way of visualizing gatherings and choirs. I've forgotten again the name for it. Lisa Fagan Davis has the collator. But what?
Viscol.
Yeah, Viscol. Thank you. That would be helpful for this first letter book to show really also which leaves have been added on at a later stage. Yeah. Matthew?
Yeah, well, congratulations on a great project. And it's obviously very important for the linguistic evidence. So I suppose if I had a question or something, a question for future developments, it would be about possibilities for sort of corpus linguistic annotation and usability linguistic corpus.
Yeah. So Matthew Holford is asking about corpus linguistics, and so we are in contact with Ingrid Schröder in Hamburg, who is working her way through volume, I think, 8 of what is meant to be 12 volumes of the Middle Low German dictionary, and is very interested in particularly other new words that we can contribute, or also the cases where out of the Latin context you get new meanings for the German words. We had now on the project a whole generational change between the first generation of postdocs and the second generation. Our very first postdoc, Simone Schulz-Balluff, came really from corpus linguistics, Bochum, where she had built up the Referenzkorpus Mittelhigh German. And then she just got last month, now finally, a permanent position in Halle as professor of historical linguistics. And I very much hope that she'll be able to pick up this element where you could make much more out of the data than we have been doing since she left. Yeah. Andrew, you know more about it anyway.
Well, I think one thing I should know is, it's incredibly difficult, of course, to convince people A, to pay for manuscript digitization, B, to pay for editions, without even to convince people that creating an edition is a legitimate scholarly activity. You've managed all of that. Yeah. What would you recommend to other people to achieve the same thing?
Funding recommendations, Andrew is asking. I think really we were incredibly lucky to have an impact community made for us, a group of women who say, we want to know, we really want to read it. So we set it up from the start as a really regional resource. And I think that has been very important to get support. So we get support from the so-called Klosterkammer, the monastic chamber, which is the institution who centrally administers the funds coming from the land holdings of all the convents. They still have, for example, hunts of large forests and things like that. So we've worked with them right from the start, and also with a regional Hanoverian foundation, which is the Volkswagen Stiftung, which doesn't have anything still any longer to do with Volkswagen directly, but was set up with the money that the Land Niedersachsen got from selling its shares in Volkswagen. So I think the regional aspect has been important, really, to communicate, to I was director of impact for the last 6 or 7 years here in Oxford. And I think it's really helpful to think from that angle. So who will benefit from it and who might be an ally in asking for funding. The Gerda Henkel Stiftung has its seat in Düsseldorf, so also where Eva Schlothäuber is located, and she personally cycled there once a month and reported on how we were doing, so to keep the sponsors informed. Good shape, yeah. Owen?
Other people have asked my questions already.
Yeah, good, yeah. Lucien?
Whenever you're using the crossings out, and I wonder whether there's a way of sort of tracking what has been crossed out and maybe if there's a different hand that's gone over it or we read it and no, that's wrong, and they crossed it out and written on top of it.
Quite often it looks as if it's done really in the writing process and pretty much immediately corrected something that had been written twice, or so at least in this letter book, there doesn't seem to be any kind of doctrinal editing or anything that a paper wanted to doctor the information. If they did it already before this particular page. And I'm working also on the prayer books from meetings, so the neighboring convent, and there you have, as a result of the Reformation, a lot of deliberate shift in doctrinal outlook. So there you can say somebody else went through it and written over, for example, Mary is addressed as Imperatrix Celorum and asked for intercession, and this is crossed out and she is addressed as Exemplum Fidei. So it's an example of faith, which made it still possible to keep the reference to Mary in the prayer book, because that's the formulation from the Confessio Augustana, how Mary is still valid, a model for Christian people. Emma, last word to you. I realize we've...
Yeah, no, I was going to ask about audiences, but I think you've covered that in talking.
Good. Right. Isabel, Miranda, anything before I end this?
I don't think so. It's been a wonderful talk. Thank you very, very much.